embodied integrated nature of embodied experience. And according to Merleau-Ponty, experience arises from the body and through the body. We are in the world with our body and we perceive the world through our body. And for Merleau-Ponty then, cognition is always embedded in the body and in the nervous system. And it's the nervous system that connects our motor faculties to our muscle faculties and our perceptive faculties. Now, if you think, for instance, of playing a game of actual football or soccer, this would constitute a physical activity. It has you running, it has you sprinting, has you tackling, and of course, shooting. And what it also has you do is look around. Look at the ball, look at your teammates, look at your opponents. It has you make...
Round, yeah.
Okay. It has you make tactical decisions within the game as well. Now, playing a game of PES, Pro Evolution Soccer, FIFA, on your Xbox puts a different kind of physical strain on the body. However, the point in case here would be that it does put a demand on your body. It has you do a different thing, but you nonetheless use your entire body to be able to play the game. Now, I want to turn to the image of video games and to see what we can say about them without jumping to intricate theories. The first thing you could say is that there's a big difference between the video game image and traditional images. And there's always a kind of danger when addressing the video game image that you would look at it in too classical a sense. The video game image is different from photography and painting. And here the notion of Lev Manovic's interface becomes interesting, because according to Lev Manovich, what the computer image does is it combines the visual representation, as we can find it in photography and painting, for instance, with the computer interface that works as a virtual control panel. It is the expression of a computer program, and as such it is endowed with procedural properties. Now, in some video games, this is made very explicit, as for instance, this example from the game Splinter Cell, in which the image looks like a control panel and it actually works like a control panel. But even in less clear-cut cases, such as this frame from Hitman Blood Money, visual representation is accompanied by procedural representation, as you can see the opponents, and the procedural representation actually allows you to shoot them as well. And in a sense, the video game image then also always oscillates between either the workings of the control panel and the visual representation. Now, here's an example in which this is made very, very explicit. On your left hand, you see a ravine, and there's a ledge leading down to it. Now, walking down this ledge is, however, not as exciting as it might seem, because at no point can you actually step off of it. In a sense, then, the ravine is reduced to an image of a ravine. It's not procedurally represented, so it doesn't function as a ravine. Now, I would like to talk about Deleuze's movement image. Deleuze's movement image functions as the main theoretical tool in what I'm talking about today. And Deleuze has used the concept of the movement image to describe how cinema is able to present us images of pure movement, movement that is not attached to any body or object. And the movement image is characterized by Deleuze by three avatars. That is, the perception image, the action image, and the affection image. And these avatars are described as images, and are even exemplified by Deleuze by certain types of framing. the long shot, the medium shot, and the close-up. But it is, however, important to remember that these images are integral parts of every movement image. So every movement image will contain a moment of perception, action, and affection. Now, let's look at the movement image, or the perception image. The perception image focuses on what is seen. It is that which the camera brings into view. And it's an integral moment of all movement images. If you can't see it, it's not there, so. But the perception image is also concerned with issues of framing. And Deleuze uses the example of the long shot to describe a movement image in which the perception image dominates. And in the long shot, you can understand that objects appear very small and their movements appear very small. So in a sense, they're made subordinate to the overall image. The perception in the perception image also ranges between two poles. There's a subjective pole and the objective one. And the subjective would be a shot as from a viewpoint of a subject, being a character in the fiction. And the other end is the objective one, and this, according to Deleuze, is cinema's greatest achievement, because cinema is able to present us with a perception that is not from a subjective viewpoint, but can be in anything. What's also interesting about the perception image is that within the movement image, perception is always already from the viewpoint of action. So the camera only brings those things into view from which action will eventually unfold. This brings us automatically to the action image, which flows naturally from the perception image. According to Deleuze, the action image is no longer concerned with issues of framing, but it is concerned with the uncurving of the universe. Now, in contrast to the long shot of the perception image, the action image is dominated in the medium shot. And here you already can see the process of incurving, because compared to the long shot, the medium shot rids the image of excess eye candy, focusing mainly and only on the action that unfolds. Now, it's interesting to see that Deleuze in this regard speaks of a delayed reaction. Now, why is that reaction in the action image delayed? That is because between the initial moment of perception and action comes the affection image. And Deleuze describes the affection image as that which occupies the gap between action and reaction, that's which absorbs an external action and reacts on the inside. In the context, for instance, of a tennis video game, it's the moment when the ball is flying towards you. You, in a split second, decide whether to use a forehand or a backhand. And Deleuze illustrates the affection image through the close-up. And usually this is a close-up of the face. And what the close-up does is it decontextualizes the face. So any movement, for instance, the corner of a mouth raising, is presented as a micro-movement. You cannot see the context in which the corner of the mouth is raised, and as such, it raises a question as to what it might mean. Compared to the action image, for instance, action framed in a medium shot is often easily perceived. You can see an arm extend and hit a fist, or hit a chin. In the close-up, that's something you have to bring to the image. But video games are now cinema. And one of the major difficulties in transposing Deleuze's movement image to the context of video game play lies in the fact that his theory is one of images rather than the experience of images. And Deleuze then focuses on technical and formal aspects of the image. And when one would transpose that to the realm of a video game, you run the risk of losing sight of the play. And I do feel that the triad of perception, action, and affection has a lot to offer to the analysis of video game play. But in order for it to be of use, we need to bring back the body. We need to go back from the image to the body. And this would mean that the properties of action, perception, and affection need to be unfolded, as it were, from the image onto the physical plane. Now, in the draft version of the paper I sent in for this conference, I aim to remedy this problem by zooming in, as it were, on, among other things, the notion of perception with Deleuze and the way in which he rejects phenomenological perception from his theory of cinema. But in preparation of this talk, it occurred to me that zooming out might provide a more productive way to reinsert the body into the concept of movement image. Because Deleuze based his theory of the movement image on the philosophies of Henri Bergson. And Bergson's movement image, in turn, can be understood as an attempt to bridge the gap between an image as a physical thing and an image as a mental representation. And according to Bergson, images exist in themselves. They neither belong to the object being perceived or the consciousness doing the perceiving. They're not a representation of anything that hide behind them. They are material in their own sense, and they are in constant movement. Take, for instance, the table in front of you. It looks like a solid table, yet on a molecular level, it is made up out of molecules that are constantly moving and vibrating around. So, in a sense, it's presented to us as an image, yet it is in movement. Now, the material world, according to Bergson, is then conceived of an aggregate of images, all of which act and react on one another. And at this point, it's already quite clear to see where Deleuze takes his inspiration from, as cinema is able to connect various different images from all over the place. There is, however, an important difference, and that is the fact that in Bergson's theory, the body stands out as a very distinct image. It is the body that frames, as it were, from among the universe of images, only those images that interest him. And in Bergson's understanding, then, the body acts as a source of action. And perception is an active selection of images from the world. And action is also presupposed by perception. We look at things in order to act. Now, with regard to affection, Bergson too locates this between action, perception and action, but he constructs it as a specific modality of the body. And in this capacity, the affective is where the yet to be taken actions are determined. It is where choice resides, and it is through the active, through the affective, that we are able to create the new and unexpected. Now, why not enter the concept of the movement image with Bergson? Why even consider Deleuze's more formal idea of the movement image? Well, it's because I feel that the experience of video game play arises from the back and forth between the formal properties of the image and the subjective experience of the play. Now, returning to the video game, Mike Jones tells us that the construction of a 3D video game is much like designing a macro mise-en-scène. The entire space at the beginning level is designed in one go, and the player only gets to see a portion of that through the frame. And in this sense, that operates much like Deleuze's close-up. You only get to see one element at a time, and you have to construct the idea of the space yourself. In this sense, the affective already enters the video game at the level of the experience of space. Well, the notion of action, that is navigation through 3D space, is only but one of the actions offered by video games. And you can also act in the image with objects and movement that occur within the image themselves. And it is this that is closely related to issues of, it is this that operates through the working of the interface images, as I mentioned earlier. Action can be both subjective and objective in the video game. It can be both your actions as well as the machines. And affection, in turn, is are the body's tendencies to action. It is where action is contemplated. Or as Suvik has formulated it, it's the part where the action of both the game and the human player are yet to be determined. Now, I want to look at 3 video games, and I'll do this very, very briefly. Since action is such a central theme, I will start with a video game in which action is central. Now, that's the game Doom 3. It's a fast-paced shooter game, and the perception and affection are made subordinate to the action. There's a lot of movement towards the player, and it has you react in a reflex manner rather than a reflective manner. And the interval between perception and action is very small. And in this sense, affection takes on the form of what Deleuze calls the impulse image, which is controlled by fetishes of good and evil. The alien comes towards you, and you have to assess very, very quickly, is this good or bad for me, and act from that. Now, Fallout 3 is a different game altogether. It extends the gap between perception and action, allowing for the affective to be played out in a much more substantial way. And in this way, the nature of action becomes one that is more of reflection rather than reflex. You have to think about the movements you make, and the movements or the actions are interconnected. So actions taken at one point in the game will affect your possibility to act further on in the game. Then there's also Shadow of the Colossus, and I feel this game plays on the perception image. It is a game in which most of the time action is absent. It is a game where you have to look for action because you're slaying a number of giants. You have to actually look for the giants, and upon finding them, the giants won't even engage you. You have to provoke them in order for the action to unfold. So in a lot of times in the games, there's all the time to look around, but no action to attach to. And in a sense, then the perception gets cut off from the action. And in the moment of action, when you, for instance, hang on the back of a giant, and it takes a simple sidestep, it occurs many times that you swing off screen. So in the moment of action, perception is not made subordinate to action and appears in itself again. Now, it has not been my intention, clearly, to give an in-depth analysis of these games. It's been my point, however, to demonstrate how the experience of video game play and the nature of action in that is bound up with perception and affection. And in conclusion, I hope that I have been able to explicate to some level the physical involvement of the player with the video game image, and hopefully to have formed a more nuanced understanding of the nature of action in playing video games.